We got one more guest here for this Wednesday, March 27th edition of the show. That is Wes Reynolds, at Wes Reynolds, the number one on Twitter. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Adam, good morning, man. How are you, sir?
Doing very well, bud. Appreciate your time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's dive right in here with Friday's Sweet 16 matchups. And, you know, as we're recording this show here, LSU, Michigan State, first game on the board chronologically. Again, we'll go chronological here with these. Pinnacle and Matchbook up to 6.5. Looks like we're starting to see that Michigan State money we've all kind of been waiting for.
Yeah, and I think it's probably going to continue primarily to be one-way traffic there. When you look at the fact that obviously bettors are looking at how the Big Ten has done so far. They've done very well in this tournament. And also the fact that, you do have Tom Izzo in the NCAA tournament in March against Tony Benford, who's, of course, kind of the interim coach right now at LSU. So people are looking at that as a coaching mismatch, and it probably is. And well, it actually is. But, this is something that I think when you look at what, whenever you have these sportsbook directors or managers or heads of operations of these books, and they're going to tell you, yeah, we're going to need LSU. I mean, they're telling you the truth. They're going to need LSU. And, I think Michigan State is going to be in a lot of money line parlays. People are going to take them because it's below 7. LSU, if they got to 7.5, might interest me actually a little bit because I think they're kind of a little bit of the disrespected team because of everything that happened with Smart's eligibility and obviously Will Wade being suspended, for the wiretaps and everything that they found. But so I think you're going to see, a lot more Michigan State money. But this LSU team, let's keep in mind, this team did win the SEC in the regular season. They were the 1 seed in the SEC tournament. And that's no small feat. I mean, this team went to Rupp and won. This team beat Tennessee at home in that double overtime game. So this is a very capable team. And they're probably being a little bit disrespected here in the line. I mean, in terms of getting involved, I really would like to have 7 with them. And I think if it can get there, and I think it might, at least in a couple places, I would tend to lean to the LSU side at that number.
Yeah, it does seem like we're going to get there. And that's an excellent point about the SEC. And I talked about that a little bit with regards to the Purdue and Tennessee game in the previous segment there with Tony George, that the SEC still has 4 teams standing, and LSU is one of them. And it was a very, very strong conference here over the course of the season. So this is a team with talent. And to see how one-sided everything is on this game, and anytime you get a game that's extremely one-sided regardless of the sport, you're going to have people that just say, you know what, this isn't really a business where everybody wins. When you get these one-sided games, a lot of times people do say, you know what, I want to take a shot on the other side. So I am curious to see what the stopping point is for this number. Sounds like maybe you think it's 7. Maybe we see it stray 7.5 in a very public book, something like that. But usually when you get these games where everybody's on one side, for one reason or another, it doesn't wind up working out for the consensus.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, too, that we've seen, and I don't usually like to handicap this way, and I don't recommend it necessarily because I think, sometimes teams see dogs cover and then, they want to gravitate toward the favorites and think it's going to balance out. And sometimes maybe it does. But you will see after you've had 4 days of action, and you have in 3 of the regions, you have the 1, 2, 3, 4. In the regional semifinals in the Sweet 16. So, I mean, from a seeding standpoint, it's been a chalky tournament. And, some people are going to be creatures of habit and kind of, I think, go with that. And that doesn't mean, okay, now take every underdog out there, necessarily because it's going to, totally regress to the mean. I mean, some years are going to be dog tournaments. Some years are going to be chalk tournaments. And that perhaps this may continue, but I do think that there are casual bettors that will look at that. Casual bettors love the trends, and that use that as a sole base for their handicapping, which I think it was a mistake instead of, using it as a tool for sure. But they will go with that, and that's why, the LSU would interest me. But with these numbers, these numbers are relatively tight. So you're very rarely, just because a final score may be off and have a discrepancy, you're very rarely going to get a number that's probably going to be off if you're doing power rating that's going to be off that much. So, when you talk about like line value, at this time of the year, you're not going to get a lot of it. And really what you have to go on, I think, is a lot of instinct and a lot of psychology and maybe just styles of play. And you're really going to be focusing more on that than necessarily you are on line value per se.
Well, another thing that's really intriguing about this game, and I've broken this game down a lot here this week, obviously you've got the Izzo factor, which is really hard to quantify. We don't know exactly how much that's worth to the line. I've heard anywhere from 3 points. I've heard some people say that, it's a 6-point advantage and that this game would be a pick'em if Will Wade was the coach there for LSU. And you look at this game schematically, you look at it from a matchup standpoint, LSU has to get to the rim. Over 14% of their 2-point offense on dunks. Sparty doesn't let that happen. Under 5% of opposing 2-point offense on dunks. Sparty's 4th in the country in field goal percentage against at the rim on dunks, layups, and tip-ins. So, if LSU wants to get to the rim, this is not the team that you can usually do it against. So you factor in that, the schematic advantages for Michigan State. You factor in the coaching advantage. This line has been up for 3 days, and it really hasn't moved off of 6. That's kind of a telling thing to me, too.
Yeah, exactly. And also looking at LSU, putting aside Michigan State's, first game against Bradley, because a lot of these favorites, if you look in the first round, especially a lot of the real premium teams, the Dukes and the Virginias, North Carolina, those teams are all down at the half to 16 seeds or 15 seeds. And Michigan State kind of fell in that same category and, pulled away late, but it was a relatively competitive game for a 2-15. And then they came out the next game and buried Minnesota. And, Minnesota couldn't do anything. I think they were like 2 of 22 from the 3. So, obviously Michigan State would prefer you shoot threes on them all day long. And then you had an LSU team that didn't cover either game. The Maryland was nip and tuck. Maryland had a chance to win at the end. I was fortunate to have 3 there. But, LSU didn't cover either game. And overrated in sports handicapping is just looking at ATS records. Because as ATS records get good, and sometimes teams have really good years against the spread and sometimes they don't, but as these ATS records mount up, the odds makers look at that. And they're going to say, okay, this team is covering a lot of games, and maybe they're going to shade a line a half a point or a point. So, it's not like, you're seeing a team against the spread and then you go bet it at the window. It's not like those guys in the back room or behind the counter don't know that. So, I think if people are looking at it that way, that's the wrong way to go about it. But, I do think LSU, they're a team that I think they're not a team that's going to beat you necessarily shooting the 3 ball. They're going to beat you driving to the basket with Waters and Smart, and they're going to, try to get to the rim and get to the foul line. But for me, in terms of a matchup, it isn't a play I'm sure of, from a pure matchup standpoint, but it's more of looking at the number. This would be me not necessarily taking a side, but taking a number if I could get LSU 7 or north of that.
All right, so let's look at the next game on the board here, Auburn and North Carolina. And I got to say, man, seeing a 5-point move on a total this late in the season with how sharp these numbers, tend to be, it's pretty telling here. So North Carolina, 5-point favorite. Total, in fact, at Bookmaker all the way up to 165.5, up from 160. So, if you're looking at a high-scoring game here, which is certainly what the expectation appears to be, makes Auburn kind of intriguing, but they are such a high-variance team.
Yeah, and the thing about it, and a lot of that, it probably will continue to move up a little bit until you eventually see some buyback, maybe a few hours before the game on the under, when you got Bruce Pearl on the SVP show saying, hey, take the over, because it's going to be a high-scoring game. But I'm a little more interested in the side here, and I actually like Carolina in this spot. And I know Auburn, the tendency is kind of take the hot team, and they fell short of expectations, and then they caught fire late in the season, won their last 3 regular season games, and then won the SEC tournament. And I thought they had a good chance to do that and had a future on them at 5-1. But they are a high variance team. And the thing is, they play this, a little bit herky-jerky, if you want to call it that, style with, a lot of backcourt pressure and speeding up the tempo and shooting a lot of threes. But I think it's almost like they play North Carolina style of basketball, but I think North Carolina basketball plays better North Carolina style of basketball than Auburn does. And I think, when you get to a team that is used to playing that style, and I think even though Auburn, I think, has good personnel, I think Carolina, is a little bit deeper and has a little bit better personnel. And, they are, it's so, I guess, profound, but I think, they're just the better team here, and they're used to playing that style. And I think Auburn a little bit, they might be the little less disciplined team of the 2 teams that play this style, because you see Auburn, they gamble for a lot of steals. Carolina does too, but maybe not as much. So, if it comes down to discipline, I think Carolina is a little bit more of the disciplined team. I think that the number probably is right, but I would still lean with North Carolina in the spot.
And, of course, North Carolina should have a big advantage on the glass here in this game as well, and that will certainly help them if Auburn's not making those distance jumpers. And something that I kind of want to touch on here a little bit, I don't think I've heard this angle talked about too much here this week, and obviously everyone's kind of beating these games to death, but you've got Duke, you've got Virginia, 2 teams that got talked about a ton in the ACC. You've got Florida State getting talked about a lot here for their athleticism and length in their game against Gonzaga. Is it possible that North Carolina is just underrated, underappreciated, undervalued? Because I feel like for being a number 1 seed and a team that was, one of the top ones on the board for the futures market, I feel like nobody has talked about this team this year. And it sort of makes me wonder if, there's maybe a little bit of hidden value here in that people don't really realize how good this team is.
And I think, and I'm probably guilty of being one of those people that have undervalued them a little bit, because I looked when they asked, who do you think the first 1 seed that's going to go out? And I thought it might be them. And I think it was because, when people talk about selecting NCAA tournament teams and these analysts on TV talk about eye tests, I saw them in person on Thanksgiving night at the Orleans Arena in Las Vegas. They were in that Continental Tire Las Vegas Invitational doubleheader, and they played Texas in the first game, UCLA and Michigan State were the second game. And, it's not that Carolina was bad. They were surely explosive, but they kind of got really, I'm making up a word here, but they kind of got out-physicaled by Texas. So that gave me the perception, seeing that in person, that, hey, this team's a little soft. And then I saw Louisville do it to them in Chapel Hill, where they led wire to wire as 12-point underdogs. So, that was my perception, and that's why my perception personally was down on North Carolina. But I just think that their draw, the draw is so key in this tournament. I think it really set up for them. They had a team in Washington that plays primarily zone. Well, Carolina sees this zone against Syracuse at least once a year. So, they were obviously prepared for it. They weren't going to get tricked by that Q-esque 2-3 zone that Mike Hopkins runs and learned under Jim Boeheim all those years on his staff. And then, getting an Iona team that's a mid-major team that likes to run up and down the floor, well, that was very comfortable for North Carolina. They're like, okay, we can come out and, play our B or C game and still beat this team. And then they get Auburn that wants to play kind of their style, that's not exactly wanting to slow them down. So, they've gotten a favorable draw here. And, it's hard for me to not see a North Carolina-Kentucky regional final. And that's no disrespect to Houston, because I think the line is 3.5. It might have been 4 with P.J. Washington, if he was totally ready to go. But now you're getting the rumors with Houston, just not to transition too much of that game, but that Kelvin Sampson may be in line for the Arkansas job. Well, then that provides a distraction. It's like, okay, we're finally in the Sweet 16, and I'm sure him and his staff are preparing hard for this game. They're taking this seriously. You're only a couple games away from the Final Four, but, you never want that type of distraction this time of year. So I think you're going to start to see a little bit, and you may be already starting to see it, maybe see a little money on Kentucky in that game.
Yeah, we are starting to see that up from 2.5 to 3, just about market wide out there on Kentucky. And I was kind of wondering when money was coming in here anyway, because Kentucky, the known commodity, we know the public has a lot more influence in March Madness than any other time of the year for college basketball. So I was kind of waiting on this. I know Houston's a good team, good record. You know, the American Athletic Conference was 24th in effective field goal percentage offense, which is not good at all. Very good defensive conference, not so great offensively. So I was kind of waiting for that line move to happen, maybe kind of waiting on Washington, I guess, is the reason why it hasn't happened yet. But, Sampson and that distraction, a good point to make there. I don't mind combining games because I want to make sure that we've got some time to talk about the WGC Match play event as well. But before we get to that, Virginia Tech and Duke. Duke's 7-point favorite, some 7.5s out there at the more public shops, 144.5 the total for this one. I think that there's more than meets the eye for this to this game. And I'm not really sure that a lot of public or novice bettors are going to realize that, but I want to get your take before I elaborate some more.
Well, I'm going to, sound like I'm on the square side here, and I probably am going to be. And I actually do like Duke in this spot. And I know there's a lot of people I respect that have taken Virginia Tech, and they're certainly capable, even though they beat them without Zion Williamson. They still beat them in Blacksburg. And, Virginia Tech has gotten Duke the last few years. In the regular season, they've usually split the season series, but they've proven they can beat this team, and that's why I think you're seeing the line go down a little bit. But I'm going to go, and I kind of like Duke here, and there's a couple reasons why. The fact that they did beat this team is certainly that they got beat by this team is certainly going to have Duke's focus, I think. And also the fact that of really the number one seeds, Duke is the only one that I think has really gotten a scare in this tournament. And I think getting that scare from UCF, they were down 3 with the ball with 20 seconds to go. And if UCF converts that lob, they're up 6 with less than 2 minutes to go, and Duke's in real trouble. And, maybe Duke got 1 or 2 favorable whistles down the stretch. I think the game was relatively evenly officiated. But, when it comes to that, and when you're a team like Duke and you're getting everybody's best shot and everybody wants to see you lose except for fans of Duke or people that have money on the game, and that's what happens. I was in a book on Sunday, and, once the Duke bettors knew that their 13.5 was way no good, they started to root for Central Florida because you want to root for the big upset. And I think when a team gets their scare like Duke has, all of a sudden you see these players, and they've got the cash is waiting for them, and just a few months down the road, and they're going to get a boatload of cash, especially R.J. Barrett and Zion Williamson. But those kids went to Duke to win a national championship. They could have went anywhere. And, maybe it gets to a point where they're kind of talking with each other or talking with the coaches like, dudes, we were almost out of here. We were almost going home getting ready to clean out our lockers on Monday or Tuesday. And, the fact that we're still here and we got almost a reprieve or a second chance, I think even though I respect Virginia Tech and respect that they have Robinson back and Buzz Williams has been able to beat this team several times, I think there is a potential for Duke to really lay out this team because I think you're going to see a more focused Duke here for sure.
I'll say this. I don't have a strong opinion on the side. I guess there's kind of a correlation to my favorite play on the game and the side because I like the under in this game quite a bit. You've got a Virginia Tech team here that has forced the opposition into a lot of threes. 50.4% of the field goal attempts against the Hokies have been from three-point range. That's the second highest mark in the country. And when you look at, their percentage of two-pointers allowed at the rim, they're 11th best in the country, 27.7%. So, excuse me, they're going to force Duke to shoot from the outside, and that is not Duke's game at all, as we all know. It's something that they did pretty well against UCF, and this is the reason why they're still standing, really, is because they had one of their better shooting performances of the season in that game. Now, whether or not Virginia Tech scores, I'm not sure. But I do know that they're going to make Duke uncomfortable offensively in the sense that, Duke's going to have to take a lot of jump shots here in this game. Now, if they make them, they could boat race Virginia Tech, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. But I think that just the fact that Duke won't have as much success getting to the rim. Maybe it will be different with Zion Williamson in this game. Maybe they will have a little bit more success, but the under is my favorite play here. And again, you would think that would correlate to taking Virginia Tech plus the 7, but for the reasons that you mentioned, I'm not all that enthralled with either side here.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point, and that's, one of the things that does give me pause on recommending Duke, even though I ultimately do. In Virginia Tech's defense, they're kind of, and I pointed this out earlier, I remember sending a tweet about it one time watching them, kind of looking at their numbers. They're playing, they've adopted a little bit where it's almost like they've adopted some of Virginia's defensive principles, where they're not necessarily running a pure pack line, but they've adopted some of those principles. I mean, and I think, it bared fruit. And, when NC State, I think, I can't remember if it was 20 or 24, but they held NC State in the 20s, a team that can really score and is an up-tempo team that does a lot of pressure. Kevin Keith, of course, a Pitino disciple. So, to hold that team to that low of a score, I mean, maybe it was an outlier, but man, that this team can absolutely defend. I do think having Zion is a big difference. And, I mean, a lot of times an injured player is overcompensated for in the line. I don't think Zion Williamson actually was. I think, he is much more worth, usually a starter might be worth 2-3 points. He was worth 5 or 6 or maybe even more in some of these games. And, I mean, I agree with you on the under here because I think, there is a proclivity this late in the season, where you have a game and it starts out kind of fast. And you saw that a little bit with Iowa, Tennessee, even though it went over because of the overtime. See a game that looks like a fast-paced game and there's just scoring early on, it slows to a crawl in the last few minutes and teams can't score. You saw that a little bit just in an NIT game of Creighton and TCU. I think it was like 30. The under was like 71.5 for the first half. It was 30-26 with a little over 5 minutes to go. So I had the under there, and I was like, oh, man, I'm cooked here. I'm done. And then all of a sudden I look at the halftime score as I'm driving home, and it's 33-30. And the game just totally slowed. So you will see that kind of in final minutes of halves here where a game could slow to a crawl, and I could definitely see that happening here.
All right, one more thing I want to talk about here. WGC Match Play event has already started. It starts on Wednesday here because they have to accommodate for so many rounds, the bracket-style format, all that type of stuff. So we can't talk about overall picks to win this thing, although there will be in-tournament running odds, especially with this bracket format. But this is a match play event. This is not a traditional stroke play event. So how does that change the handicap for you? Are you mostly just looking at, matchups exclusively here?
Yeah, I did a lot less futures. I think I ended up playing 4 guys, and that I mentioned on our long shot show last night, and they were John Rahm, Louis Oosthuizen, Ian Poulter, and Alexander Noren. And really, I was just taking, basically on futures, I was just taking guys that have really good records in match play. I mean, Ian Poulter, 41, 17, and 5 career, when you include all the individual match play events, and then you include the individual matches in the Ryder Cup. Alex Noren, 17 and 7, even though he doesn't really come in on great form. A guy like Oosthuizen, 20, 12, and 2. So, I mean, just kind of looking for proven match play commodities. In the groups, I took a lot more plus money guys because it is very rare, even though you've had guys like Dustin Johnson and Jason Day, top-seeded players win this event. It is very rare that you're going to get in this format, you're going to get the top 16 seeds go through. So you're going to see guys. I mean, you had Bubba Watson and Kevin Kisner, and they were both, I think, seeded like in the 30s. They were not even the top seeds in their groups, and they were the guys in the final last year. So, I looked at a little bit more groups. I'll do a little bit more matchups. It's not your typical stroke play event where I can do, 6, 7, 8 futures at various prices, from then the maybe a couple 20-to-1 guys to all the way up to triple digit to 1. So, I mean, so that kind of was my approach here a little bit. And I think, there is some value, and you saw some matchups in the first round where, you get these guys to the moon where it is very hard to take them. I mean, when you're seeing guys like Justin Thomas and Molinari, of course, him and Fleetwood were amazing in the Ryder Cup in Paris last year. You know, you're paying premiums to take those guys, and I mean, 3 matches in 3 days, they're guaranteed that they may drop one, so it's worth taking a shot on some of these dogs, you know, against Dustin Johnson, because these guys are going to be geared to play these top guys, you know, head to head. And when you got a chance, I mean, you used to see it all the time with Tiger. You know, when you got a chance to play Dustin Johnson, you got a chance to play a Justin Thomas or a Brooks Koepka or somebody like that. You know, these guys are going to get up to that because, I mean, that's, you know, a test for them if you're ranked in the 40s or the 50s in the official world golf rankings. You know, that's a chance to prove that, hey, I belong with some of the top players. So, you know, that's a lot of what I look at. You know, it's a different event because obviously the groups get adjusted, and I actually preferred the knockout because it made it a shorter event. I actually preferred the, you know, one and done type of format here rather than the round robin, because I think, you know, if you're going to get to the final 4 in this, if you lose in the semifinals, you're going to play a consolation match. You got to play 7 matches. And, like, you know, you get guaranteed 3, and then you're going to play 2 on Saturday in the 16 in the round of 8. And then you're going to play 2 on Sunday in the semis and in the finals and consolation match. So it's like, you know, that is a lot. And I talked about this with our guest Will Gray on Long Shots last night from Golf Channel. And he and I were both very surprised to see 61 of the top 64 players play in this event. I mean, the only guys that really skipped it were Ricky Fowler and Adam Scott. I thought you'd have many more considering we're only 2 weeks out from Augusta.
Yeah, I thought so too. And, you know, what was interesting was yesterday I did Dave Koken's Las Vegas Sportsline show with Ralph Michaels, and, you know, he has Jeff Sherman on every week. And, I mean, Jeff Sherman's at Golf Odds on Twitter. So, you know, obviously it's a guy that certainly knows what he's talking about in the golf market. And I asked him about Alex Noren, and I know that you mentioned he's on your card. He's 10-2 in his career here at Austin Country Club since they moved this event there in 2016. And I asked him, I said, you know, Alex Noren, not a guy in good recent form, but a good match play player and also a very good match play guy right here at this course. So I asked, you know, how you sort of weigh the recent form versus, you know, maybe an event that sets up well for a guy. And he said, you know, look, based on the power ratings we have, Alex Noren's like a 125-1 guy, but we've got him listed at 80-1. So that just sort of to how you want to handicap this event, because some guys are just simply more comfortable in that match play type of environment, you know, because it's something that I think we probably gravitate towards European players and those things more than anything, because there's a couple more match play events over there. And, you know, we always think about the Ryder Cup and President's Cup and all that. But I thought it was just interesting that, you know, it necessitated such a big difference in price just simply because a guy, you know, really plays better in that format and is kind of a horse for course for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, you know, that's kind of why I went with more proven commodities in match play in this event with a guy like Poulter, who hasn't won this year, but his ball striking statistics have been off the charts, and he's had a lot of good finishes, both here on the stateside, you know, and was third in the WGC Mexico. Actually, I believe, he was third, but had a lot of top 3, top 6 finishes. Over in Europe, had a 3-week stretch, I think, where he's third, second, third, or third, sixth, third. So, I mean, guys that their ball striking is just good. And, you know, some of this, there's so many interesting angles with the match play. We actually brought up Jordan Spieth in the discussion last night. He's making a lot of bogeys right now. Doesn't always hurt you in match play because it costs you 1 hole, but he's still making a lot of birdies. I mean, yeah, he might make 5 or 6 bogeys, but he's making 6 birdies too. So, I mean, birdies are going to win you holes in match play. So he wasn't a guy, obviously, any of us took this Spieth with his recent form, but those are different things because it is such a different structure. You got to look at things like that, you know, where, okay, if a guy makes a mistake, it's only going to cost him 1 hole, whereas in a stroke play event, you know, triple bogey, and then all of a sudden you're struggling to make the cut.
Wes Reynolds is working to follow on Twitter at Wes Reynolds and the number 1. Wes, appreciate the time as always, man. I appreciate your time throughout the season here also. We'll see if we can get you on for some one-off segments here over the summertime. But with the format change next week, the last regular appearance for you here for this season for football and basketball. So thank you so much for joining me week after week, man. It's been a pleasure as always, and talk to you again real soon.
Hey, Adam, thank you always for the time, man. You've always been very good to me, and, good luck with your baseball guide, and I know you're doing a lot of media appearances, and I'm glad that people are recognizing your work for all these years and the good content you guys have been putting out.
Thank you so much, Wes. Appreciate it, man. Take care.